I'll introduce you to our panel here. You've met us, most of us, before. I'm Karen Kearns, President's Entrepreneur in Residence, and I work with Jim Oliver with the Innovation Center and Human Resources. Also, we have Spencer Braley. Spencer, can you pop on a minute? Because we got to see those Christmas lights. It's not an innovation flagship without your Christmas lights.
Good afternoon.
Innovation at its peak, Tom. So there's our technician, Spencer. If you have any problems, he's the guy to email. Abram Anders, and he'll introduce, he's with the, Abram, can you introduce your title here?
Of course. I'm in the English department as an associate professor, and I direct ISU Foundation courses, our first and second year communication and writing course sequence.
And also Abram is our flagship moderator and co-creator with Anna Luz and Nakaya Rucker. And Abram really has really helped us pioneer how to create this, how to collect the information from it. It's been fabulous. Nakaya is with the University Library. Nakaya, our moderator, do you want to say something about questions, Nakaya?
Absolutely. Welcome everyone to another Flagship Friday. So as we engage in this discussion, I encourage you to engage in it alongside us. This is not something where we're talking at you. This is pretty much a conversation where we're all just kind of bouncing ideas off of one another. So if you have a question, if you have a thought or an idea, please use the Q&A section and place that in there, and we'll make sure that we get that to Tom. And you'll kind of see me popping in and out, interrupting Tom, asking you questions based on what we're getting in the chat.
Yeah. And I'm going to encourage, in addition, Nakaya, our listeners to make everything count twice, at least twice. That's what innovators do. So don't just take the information in, but ask questions and engage in a way that says, what does this mean to me? What do I need? And how could I utilize this unique resource and access to accelerate my own progress? Anna Luz is, if President Winterstein's referred to me as the spark plug, Anna Luz is the champagne. She is our energy, our passion. And Anna Luz, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, hello. I will probably dance and do funny stuff for you, but hi everyone. I'm from the College of Design, Department of Industrial Engineering. Industrial design. It was industrial engineering in my previous life. You see at the back, design thinking. So if you need anything on the creative side of conceptual idea generation, problem solving, knowing more things about the beginning of your thought into a thing, come and talk to me. I'll ask Nakaya to put my email also on the line. And let's hear Tom. I'm excited. I will do the dance, Tom.
Well, and you got that design thinking book behind you. I'm gonna plug you. I wasn't planning on endorsing it, but I design thinking is a critical piece of what I do too. So.
I will introduce our session, of course, with our Did You Know Innovation Fact of the Week. Our Innovated Iowa State activity. In the last week, we had our first official Innovation Fellows Corps orientation, and we'll be working alongside 21 student innovators, ranging from areas of human nutrition to mechanical engineering. We will keep you updated about their progress. That's our Did You Know Innovation Fact for this week. We welcome Tom Stuermer. Tom, help me pronounce your last name correctly. Stuermer?
Stuermer, or Stuermer, but Stuermer.
Stuermer. Yeah, let's not get me quite there yet, but he's the Global Managing Director of Accenture. Tom is Accenture's global lead for the Google Business Group. And as lead, Tom works to drive, develop, and guide the practice, focusing on innovation, market differentiation, fostering the business relationship with Google, and managing the hypergrowth of Google. And I'm hoping you'll define hypergrowth too at some point. Tom is recognized for his ability to successfully lead with innovative technologies focused on digital, data plus AI, and cloud for clients seeking deeper industry specialization and transformation. I will note Tom is an ISU engineering graduate. Tom, aerospace? Oh, double. Okay.
Aerospace? No, well, twice. I wouldn't say double, twice. Aerospace engineering and engineering mechanics the second time.
Fabulous. And he is also on our Student Innovation Center Advisory Council. He also, Tom has graciously decided to be one of our professional practice coaches for our Innovation Fellows. That's a really unique opportunity for innovation fellows that are working on programs and possibilities to connect with someone and have a conversation with someone like Tom. Really does differentiate your education here. So I continue to be moved by our alumni who generously contribute their time and expertise. And I am also continually humbled by Abram's contribution there. So Abram, back to you.
Thank you so much, Karen. Well, Tom, we're so excited to speak to you in this first major segment. We want to get to know you and your story. You have a really interesting path to your current role, and we want to talk about that. But before we even do that much, for all our students in the audience, could you just explain what's your role and what do you do?
Sure. Well, I wish this was a live room so I could sort of see the raise of hands, but I suspect a lot of people don't know what Accenture is. So let me start with that. I'll talk a bit about my role, and then we'll see where we go from there. Accenture is a $43 billion professional services business, and we've got 500,000 employees, and our focus is really on helping our clients to become agile, disrupt their industries, or avoid being disrupted in their industries. Sort of the inside joke in my line of work is none of us that work for Accenture can explain what we do to our mom. Essentially we are sort of the engine inside of a lot of companies and helping them to transform themselves, helping them to become more effective, to be able to focus on the things that are going to make them more powerful, more disruptive, to create the kind of growth that they want to be able to drive. And there's frankly no place that's been more evident than this year as a result of COVID. If you've been watching what's happening in the way companies work, it's been even more disruptive than, for those of you that are students trying to go to classes, right? In a matter of days, these are companies that were primarily in offices and needed to find a way to not only have people work from home, but also oftentimes work on extremely sensitive information, sensitive systems that we're sort of presuming you would be in place and in person. And the amount of agility that these companies needed to be able to exert to pivot into that model, it was first of all a great lesson for them, and second of all, got them to understand that, hey, there's a lot of things that I used to assume were completely off the table that we couldn't do. Now I realize, hey, we can do a lot. This sort of reset the norms and helped to break a lot of the bonds that used to exist, that has opened up an opportunity for a lot of these companies to rethink it. So in that company, actually up until 2 months ago when I took on this Google job, what I had been doing is actually running our ecosystem globally. And the Google role I'll get to is a microcosm of that. But what that meant, so over the course of the past 3 years, what I've been focused on is taking advantage of the companies that are out in the marketplace and finding ways to, I like to sort of jokingly say, weaponize the unique differentiation that we all have, right, to solve really gnarly problems for our companies and our clients. And so, one form of innovation is what I'll call combinatorial innovation. And it's really being able to take pieces of innovation, combine them in new ways to be able to go drive disruption or drive something different. And so my role was to really orchestrate that for Accenture, make bets where we needed to, help build businesses, so essentially incubating those and venturing with them, and turning them into cash flow generators for both of our companies. So with Google, what I'm doing is taking advantage of not only Google Cloud Platform is kind of the third and fastest growing big cloud platform globally, but also pulling together sort of the broader components of the Alphabet company, digital marketing, digital ads, maps, self-driving cars, data collection, all kinds of things that they do, including Google Cloud Platform, to enable companies to take a very wildly different approach, machine learning and AI in particular. And so, we've actually launched some businesses. There's something we went public with this spring called Intient, which is a drug discovery patient kind of a clinical trials platform where, every drug that gets launched is $1 billion+ proposition for the company, kind of pharmaceutical company that needs to develop it. And what we did with Google is built out a platform that enables a data sharing where the hundreds and sometimes thousands of companies that have to interact in just developing one drug through clinical trials, through pharmacological studies, those companies all need to be able to interact and take advantage of the data. And so that's an example of the kind of thing we've done, is built this platform. And now a number of large pharmaceutical companies are utilizing this to learn from what they've done in the past. We have the data that we anonymized to be able to better understand the dynamics of clinical trials, as an example, and how to check the efficacy of drugs. And so the solution gets stronger and stronger the more companies use it, because they're learning from each other. And so that's an example of some of the innovative kind of things that we're doing with Google. So it's probably the coolest job, I think I could have, honestly. And it sort of turned me into an innovator as much as anything else, but it's also something that just, I wake up with passion every day about it.
Well, Tom, that's really exciting to hear that description. I think one of the things that sounds incredibly unique about your perspective is you're really looking at the way that innovation really, it not only cuts across expertise within companies, but it sounds like it cuts across companies. You're talking about creating these platforms where IP is being shared. People are looking for solutions that can help them be better partners. When we think about crossing all those different domains, expertise, what kind of preparation do you need to do your job? And, I kind of know that you have a lot of different forms of preparation, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about this sort of idiosyncratic steps along the way to your current role. What are the different kinds of expertise and experiences that allow you to do the work you do today?
Well, I could talk a little bit about my journey, maybe, or I could get more specific about sort of my mindset. But maybe I'll start with the journey and try to make it a bit more real to people, if that helps. Okay, so I'm the youngest of 7. I was the kid that was always fighting for the scraps at the dinner table. Grew up in the Chicago area, and I lived about 1.5 miles from Glenview Naval Air Station in Chicago. So airplanes flying in and out all the time. And growing up, I was always a bit fascinated by airplanes, which we'll get to in a minute. But my hobbies were, I love playing music. I played in a few sports. Was never particularly great at it, but I love kind of the exercise. And as I went through high school, I think one key point that I found is my first little spark of innovation is I had a sophomore geometry teacher, Don Zom, who saw in me, I was a bit bored, a bit kind of distracted, and pulled me aside one day and said, what are you doing? You're sandbagging in this class, and challenged me. As I talked through the situation, I said, well, we have to do these trigonometric proofs over and over again, and it's annoying and kind of problematic for me. And he said, well, why don't you define some theorems, present them to the class. If I approve it, then the whole class can use that theorem on any exam or any homework that you have. So he essentially gave me the job of being able to define simplification steps for the whole class. And so I thought, this is great. I went and built probably 8 or 9 theorems that would allow me to short circuit homework, and I could use them on exams, and I could be done earlier. And I just had to invoke, Stuermer theorem number 4 or whatever it was. And it was a completely out of left field move for that teacher to sort of see in me that I was bored, and he could tell I was at least kind of smart. So he gave me that challenge, and it was so exciting to just have the opportunity, and in a certain way, the social dimension of it is to make everybody else's job easier too. So in the classroom, that helped things as well. But it was a really interesting pivot, and what I learned from at least that couple of the 4 years in high school was the little things that you experience can make a big difference in the path that you take, and pay attention to those opportunities that come along your way. And I also I spent some time working in a vending machine factory during high school as well, and I learned that monotony is my arch enemy. It is my kryptonite. And so as it came out of high school, I liked airplanes, I liked math, and I was pretty convinced being an engineer was the right path. And frankly, most people just told me this would be really hard. In aerospace engineering, that's probably going to be the hardest. So I thought, hey, there you go. That feels like the right plan. I really hadn't thought it through, but it seemed like the generally right path. And in college, my first 4 years at Iowa State, you know, in the 80s. I tested out of some classes from, you know, I had a pretty good high school that I went to and tested out of a few AP classes, and took like a sophomore year honors math class, I was the only non-math major in the class. And that was a big mistake. But what I found was I just was able to kind of dig in and figure it out. And I think, one of the big conclusions that I came through out of college is, you know, the projects that I liked the most were usually interactive and collaborative with people, because we had to like figure out how to pull the pieces together. But what I actually realized about my training in engineering is that it wasn't about being an engineer. It wasn't about being mathematics. It was about allowing mathematics to sort of confirm or deny my intuitive sense of how pieces should fit together. So it was really more like, not engineering for its own sake, but to me, it was a means to test hypotheses, use scientific practice to try to pull different pieces of things together.
Tom, I want to follow up on some of those. You just breezed by so many innovator qualities. One was mentioned by Anthony Sardella last week, which was impatience, right? And
I like to think of it as laziness.
Okay, I would be on the other side, the positive side, right? The other was stewardship, that teacher saw something in you to trust, and to turn over his classroom to you and trust that there would be value there to allow you to explore and experiment. That teacher must have seen something in you that was trustworthy to allow you to kind of build that. I am wondering, because that's a really important innovator quality, and it's something that when I think of our young students, I think about that's one of the things they want people to trust them. They want to behave in a fashion that gets other people to engage in them. What do you think that high school teacher saw in you that made him turn that over?
You know, he approached me. I did pretty poorly on an exam once, kind of early in that class, and he approached me about it and was like, "Come on, you're better than this. You know, like these are silly mistakes. You're not paying attention." And we got into a discussion, and I sort of related, well, you know, side note here, this is actually sort of like a mid-grade level, you know, in high school, sort of you're tiered on kind of math tracks. And I think part of what he recognized is I was sort of annoyed that I was in this mid-tier math class. And so he's kind of like, all right, well, gave me a little kick in the butt and threw that challenge out in front of me. And actually, I will say, in terms of stewardship, the end of that year, he endorsed me to go take, I guess it was that, yeah, it was that next year, to take the AP exam, or the AP class the next year. And we had the school I was in, actually, that was a Loyola Academy, and the chair of the Loyola University math department would come up in a zero period and teach. And so he convinced the math department to let me in, even though I was in this mid-tier class, which is, again, you know, went out on a limb, made a big bet, you know, potential embarrassment for him, but kind of put his faith in me, and kind of pushed me forward on it. And so to your point, I mean, I think the trust and stewardship of sort of looking out for something unusual that, you know, maybe make a bet on it is definitely an innovative piece of what he taught me as well.
Risk, right? Yeah. You see something. One of the things Lewis Carr, who will be speaking on the 23rd, talked about as a key defining moment for him with innovation was somebody saw something in him and decided to do something about it. And I think that's a really critical component of the innovator's journey, for those of us who are encouraging students as well. The other thing I noted was your sense of comedy. You talked about comedy as improv, or innovation as improv. And I think you need to speak to that part of your journey, because that's a little bit of the ornery part of your journey, right? The I'm bored, contrarian, I'm going to get there a faster way. Talk about that.
Well, so I mean, I mentioned being a musician. I was pretty good. And there was an inflection point, in fact, in high school, where I had been accepted to Iowa State, so must have been my senior year, and I was playing at a gig, and a band approached me. It's like something out of Spinal Tap. Their drummer had died, and they wanted me to go tour with them. And I was like, first of all, like, I don't know if I want to know the story about how the drummer died, but like, I'm going to go be an aerospace engineer. Like, they're like, yeah, that's, you got to come tour. This is like on the road. And it was sort of obviously a pivotal decision. But I think the point that I make from that experience is that I always thirsted for the creative as well as the structured. So, I am a bit of an intuitive. But being an intuitive is a great thing, by the way, but a lot of mistakes are made by being intuitive. And what intuition can allow you to do is to leapfrog things and hypothesize, but you must have the rigor, the intellectual rigor and discipline to verify. And a lot of people will get constrained in the process of innovation by trying to calculate their way to a new answer without applying the creative spark or the innovative spark. And so to me, a really important dimension of an innovator is having that balance. And so the creativity piece, and I'm kind of curious how many people have ever seen live improv before. Again, I raise your hands. Okay, so I grew up in Chicago, and we used to go to Second City a lot as a kid. And, it's pretty intimidating to be in this small audience, to have 8 actors and actresses sitting on stage, and they'll start the evening and say, okay, so what do you guys want to talk about today? And they'll take topics, they'll take ideas, and to see it unfold live, and you're like, that was my idea, they just worked in there. It looks like complete pandemonium from the outside, right? But there's so many parallels to innovation that I think it's an important kind of connectivity to make intellectually, right? Because it is it's not a process. There is not a process of creation that happens through that. It is a set of rules. So it's not, it's more structural than it is procedural. And there's also, for anybody who's like a software developer, this is the whole notion of kind of a scrum, right? Or a rumble. It's all about having some guidelines and just operating inside of those parameters. In improv, these apply completely to innovation as well. There's like 3 or 4 or 5 kind of core rules, right? And the first rule of those rules is to say yes, or say yes and, right? To not say no, to not sort of try to hijack the theme. So if another person, another actor in improv says, sets up a construct and you don't like the construct, you don't get to turn it upside down, because that'll completely disrupt the flow. Also, another rule is to add new information. So anytime you step in as an actor in improv, you add something new to the story. You don't take it away. You add something new. You make it more compelling. You drill more depth into what's going on. And that helps to propel the story forward and to create more texture to what the idea is that you're trying to work through. The third one is not to block anything, right? So like, say somebody pulls out a fake knife and is about to stab you, you don't stop them from doing what they're about to do, because they actually, number one, had an idea that they were going to play into. And so you can't stop the story. You can't say no. You can't call it a bad idea. You need to kind of go with it and, again, add to it versus blocking to it. The fourth really key role is about playing in the present and using the moment, right? Sort of having your head in the game as to what's going on right now and how can I get the interplay of these pieces to actually work. That's a truly key piece, because sometimes if you lose plot, if you're thinking about where this is going to go next, 5 steps down the path, you will lose the ability to keep it connected to what's going on in the moment. And then lastly, the last big rule is change. Change. Drive something different. Continue to propel the story forward. And look, if you look at these 5 rules, they are fundamental to really good innovation as well. They're fundamental to really good software development, which is where a lot of these ideas came from. It's giving a team a set of parameters to operate in and letting them loose. The amount of leash you give people versus the amount of leash that you hold on to is, it's more important to be able to give leash, but to know where the parameters are.
Yeah.
And I got all kinds of sort of theories and opinions about innovation, but that is one of them. And if you haven't had an opportunity, go see improv. And if you really want to take the opportunity, make yourself uncomfortable and go to an improv training session and actually go learn how to do improv. It will make you super uncomfortable, and you will learn so much about improv and about how things like agile methodology would even be a sort of a more mundane version of this, to understand how those rules generate interplay between people.
Hey, Tom, I think speaking of improv and audience suggestions and going with the flow here, I think this might be a great time for Nakaya to jump in with a couple questions. We've got a few from our audience members that might help further the conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks, Abram. And thanks, Tom, for all of the great storytelling. A friend of mine actually does improv here in Des Moines, and she absolutely loves it. So speaking of improv, we have a question from Benjamin, and Benjamin wants to know more about this stewardship piece between students and their professors. Benjamin's main concern, or his point, is that a lot of students, especially with the generation of undergrad students, let's say, we live in a very technology age, I'll just say that, and everyone's always on their phone, which makes it a lot easier for people to be introverted. Most people are very extroverted on social media, on Twitter and Facebook, but that sometimes doesn't translate when we are in the classroom. So could you speak to maybe some other ideas or ways that students can really be go-getters and not be introverted, especially when it comes to mentorship, building relationships with professors, building relationships with industry professionals as well, especially in this COVID time as well, when everything is so virtual?
So that's an excellent question. And honestly, you know, I'm glad I don't have to be a student right now, because I can't even, I mean, I'm observing it, right? I've got a 22-year-old as of 2 days ago, 15, almost 16-year-old, and a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old. And like watching all of them wrestle with online learning right now is hard to see. I love it because my job is always interacting with people all over the world, so I can travel less. So I mean, it's an important point. I think, first of all, just in terms of utilizing technology today, I can't emphasize enough, and I have this discussion with my kids too. You got to get your head out of your phone once in a while. And when you have a complex concept to relate to someone, is a good starting point. Get into a live discussion with them. Don't try to messenger it. You know, there's that like send button that used to be what phones were made for. That's now like an afterthought. Like, actually call them up and say, look, here's what I'm wrestling with. It forces you to think through structured ways to communicate. And I almost went down a path that I'll maybe get to a little bit later, but developing the skill of structuring your communications is one of the key things you need to be able to do in life to be successful, and especially in innovation where there are so many ideas flying around. The ability to turn them into a focused objective and be able to articulate that clearly is one of the hardest things for people to do, kind of that balance. And so that would be one piece. The second piece I would say is really go out of your way to learn about your teachers, to learn about your professors, and understand kind of what makes them tick. And you're going to find sometimes the content of the class is very interesting, but the teacher, you sort of like, I'm not so sure I jive with this person. Other times you may have a teacher who you really like and a topic you aren't real impressed with. And my guess is you probably like those classes better than the ones where you had a topic that you really thought was interesting, but you didn't like the teacher. You know, kind of pay attention to that fact and at least start with the ones who you seem to gel with and start asking them questions. Think about, ask them about their background. Think about discussions like we're having right now and look to learn from them. Teachers love to engage in that way. I'd say particularly now, they probably are thirsting for it. And, just ask them questions about what did you do to sort of, to work yourself through this part of where I'm coming from right now. And how do you think about ways we can use this topic that we're learning today? Until they see you as something other than a box on a Zoom screen, they're not going to be able to really steward you well. And quite honestly, I suspect I'm speaking for any of you that are educators on this call, that it's something you probably miss. That was a lot easier to do a year or two ago. So a couple of suggestions, but hopefully that answers your question, Benjamin. It's a good question.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tom. And then I have a few questions, but we will get to all of these throughout this session. So my next question is from Haley. And Haley wants to know, what were some challenges that you faced along your journey? And also, do you have any regrets or thoughts about changing your future plans, which I think is interesting because a lot of times once you graduate and you get the degree, you often have this view of this or that, like I have to choose between this situation or this position or this opportunity. And so I'm interested in hearing about, how did you choose and go after your heart throughout this whole journey? How did you keep that first? How did you do this and that? And maybe there are situations when you had to choose, if you could speak to that.
Haley, great question. You actually, to a certain extent, Nakia, you answered the question, at least my version of the answer, which is that every step I just made the choice based on what I found the most compelling. And there's a lesson that I would sort of relate inside of that, which is sometimes that decision was one of the most painful. How do I say it? Of the options I had in front of me, the one that I picked because it was the most interesting to me, or the one that motivated me the most, or really stirred my passion, was the most painful of the options to pick. That includes, I have been with Anderson Consulting / Accenture for 27 years. I'm a short attention span guy that doesn't like monotony. Like, I never in a million years thought I would be here this long. And in fact, one of the greatest things I ever did was I was miserable in a role that I was in. Gosh, this is almost 17, 18 years ago now. And an opportunity popped on my lap to go, run a services arm of a company. And so I jumped at it. And I never actually made it out of the door, but what it caused me to do is to fundamentally rethink the things I was doing. And it caused me to say, I don't have to just sort of go with the flow here. I knew what I wanted to do, and I knew that what I was doing, I didn't like. And rather than just sort of kvetch about the thing I didn't like, it taught me to say, okay, well, this is what I want to go do, and work with my leaders, the equivalent of my professors, right, of my organization, and say, this is my goal. Like, I want to go do that. And lo and behold, those leaders said, well, look, you're going to leave anyway. Like, we got to go figure out the stuff that you were doing. So let's set you up in a role to go achieve those other goals. And from that point, I never looked back. And I just, I have pardon my French, but in consulting, you work with a lot of different clients. And you've heard like life's too short for cheap wine or crappy wine. Life's also too short for crappy clients. And in my line of work, the clients are sort of that's the engine that drives everything we do. Is they're the ones that pay us to do things on their behalf and to go change what they're doing. And so, I went and found my next job every time. Right? To a certain extent, the thing I love about my job is that you do something different every 6 to 9 months. And what I found was that I had to take much more control over that and talk with people in network and understand what's happening so that I could guide my own path and find the thing that was the most interesting and go push myself in that direction, even if it wasn't the easiest or the one, maybe I had to convince a lot of people to make that happen.
Tom,
so hopefully that answers your question, Amy.
Yeah, you've talked about really interesting innovator ethic. You don't run from, you run toward.
Running towards, yes.
Right?
Don't run away from pain, run towards the thing that motivates you.
Right. And I think that is the temptation when you're trapped or caught in a situation, is to look at the situation as an escape rather than look at it as a trigger to what am I running toward to turn that around. So good, really good.
If you have that attitude and you always think about putting yourself and the people that you work with into the best possible situation that will motivate them and mobilize them and get them waking up every morning, you will never work a day of your life. You'll wake up every morning like I'm doing this today. And of course there's going to be crappy days and there's going to be days where you're like, oh, I have to go have this discussion. I got to go I know this is going to be a painful thing, but as long as you have the passion around it, it blows out any other obstacles emotionally, mentally that you might have. I just met with my financial planner a couple of days ago, and he was like, "So when are you going to retire?" And my wife looked at me, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't really want to. I'm 52 right now. Like that's like at least 10, 15 years. I just like I'm not even. It's not even a factor in my mind because I'm just getting paid to do cool stuff, as opposed to like drudging my way through a job. And if you can have that mentality, I tell you, innovation's so much easier. And it's at its core. Really good innovation comes from personal motivation, right? Some of the greatest companies that were ever built came out of a personal passion of the founder to go solve a problem that they saw everywhere around them that no one else saw. And, you've heard the term, it's, whatever, 10% or 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Like if you don't have the motivation, the 99% of perspiration will kill you every time. Mm-hmm. The inspiration will come in a flash sometimes, but it's all about the hard work to get there.
Well, Tom, let's make sure we get some time to talk about that cool stuff you get to do. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your current role. And, one of the things I'm really curious about, you emphasized in your opening introduction the idea that the kind of work you're doing with Accenture right now for groups like Google is really that helping them facilitate that combinatorial innovation. And I wonder if you could speak to why it makes so much sense to have an agency come help you do that, as opposed to internal innovation. And, in my mind, maybe part of the answer is this tension between cultures of exploitation and efficiency within an organization versus the ability to explore and discover new opportunities. But maybe it's something else entirely. What would you say is the main value proposition to hiring Accenture for someone like Google?
So let me start with a little bit of a background. I mean, one of the reasons Jim Oliver and I get along so well is, 30 years ago when I went through Iowa State, I left the engineering program really not having any idea how a company worked, how a business worked. Like I took economics, and so I kind of knew what a P&L looked like. But I didn't actually know, like, what's the procurement organization do? What does supply chain do? How do these pieces fit together? One of the notable dimensions of enterprises through the latter portion of the 20th century was the creation of specialized functions inside of the organization to drive efficiency out of those functions. And, back as globalization was happening, those specializations were really important for those companies to be able to create value and to be competitive against each other. That's fundamentally changed over the course of the past, let's say, 10 years. Right? I mean, I don't know if anybody has ever heard of a title of a digital officer, but that's a thing now, right? Well, all it represents is the companies over the past 10 years have recognized that technology used to be used to make things more efficient inside of the company. Now technology is being used to take advantage of data to be more agile, to learn faster, to be able to see what's around the corner and to make change rapidly. And that means that the orientation of a company today, or in the recent past, with its vertical structures, its rigor to drive discipline around the function, is the exact opposite of what is needed tomorrow in a company that's going to be really disruptive and impactful. And so, therein lies essentially what we do, and what my job within Accenture is all about, is that companies, think. You can use examples, right? There's sort of Uber or Airbnb, right? Industries used to have really significant barriers to entry, and it was usually capital, money. Like, it takes a lot of money to compete with me, and so you either got to build that money up over time, or you got to have big deep pockets to go compete with me. But Uber and Airbnb, Uber started as a dispatch platform for black limos in New York, right? And now it's destroyed the taxi market, and then it destroyed the demand for new cars. Now, obviously COVID sort of alters their dynamic a bit. If you think about that for a minute, Airbnb, Marriott is the largest hotel chain in the world, really big client of ours. Airbnb almost destroyed that industry because they hold no real estate. All they are is an exchange, essentially a reservation system, and people will willingly sign up and contribute margin and profits to them to be a part of that platform. And so, those are sort of early indicators from the earlier part of the last decade that showed companies like, oh my gosh, like the things that used to make us an insurmountable force of nature are now our liabilities. And so we need to, what my job is all about is helping our clients learn how to become adaptive and agile using tools to break the bonds, right? So things like moving to the cloud and learning how to do machine learning and using data to guide you. Like that's, in a sense, the engineering part of getting a company to work properly, but then there's all the people pieces. Like, how do you get human beings to stop being afraid of failure and being excited about success? How do you allow them to fail culturally, which is a very distinct innovation dimension, and not get fired and not think that they're never going to get promoted because they failed? If you failed and you learn from it, that is innovation. That is how you actually progress. And so there's a huge amount of work that we do around helping companies just behave culturally different. And a lot of our clients are like, yeah, we got this cloud thing. We've got a data science team. And it's like, so how's it working for you? Well, we're really not getting that much value out of it. Well, it's because they haven't been able to use that data and kind of step back and look at the bigger picture. And so one of the big things that we do, and this is why one of the reasons I love this job so much, is that we are able to help them kind of break free, think about their market, think about their assets that they have, the skills they've got, the property that they own, the plants, etc. And like, how can you use that in a massively different way? There's a great example. We worked with a bank, First Bank of Australia, FAB, who lends a lot to farmers and agriculture. And as you might know, if you paid any attention last year, like all the fires that were happening in Australia, it's a pretty barren place, right? And what they were worried about was that their yield on their loans were pretty low. And so they were asking a question about how do we increase yield? And we used design thinking and kind of pulled them aside and said, well, so let's talk about your business and your lender, your what do you call it, the people you lend to. Let's talk about what they're up to. And what we realized is that one of the big issues they had was, given the massive climate variability of these farmers, they had huge losses that they continually had to write off in this part of the marketplace. And so rather than trying to solve the yield issue, what we did was we launched an IoT program for the bank to actually subsidize giving these farmers moisture sensing mechanisms and the ability to actually, they changed the economic dynamic of that part of their portfolio so that they had a much more reliable, the businesses that they were bankrolling with these farmers had a much more reliable source of income. So they had the loss levels went way down. Like, it was completely reframing the problem and solving it in a way that, why is a bank deploying IoT into farms? If you look at it from the surface, you're like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But it directly solved the massive problem they had. And they told us, like, we never would have even thought about this if we hadn't worked with you guys.
Yeah. Tom, I want to point out fidelity. I want to point out two things here. It's worth pausing on. What you did is help that bank create a relationship by providing really a more holistic relationship of success. And you could help them create fidelity, customer fidelity, because of that relationship. That is really important. Those are both important innovator qualities, and especially fidelity, we cannot pass that by. Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, the First Australian Bank is now owns the agriculture market. And when we work with clients, in the same way, they become clients for life. I mean, we have 97 of the Fortune 100 are clients of ours, and all but one of them have been clients for more than 10 years.
Wow.
Right. In part of that, we attribute directly to the fact that we're not just making them more efficient. I mean, that's kind of, again, that's like 20th century thinking. Yet we do that. Like, that's kind of the nuts and bolts of being sure that you can provide kind of incremental specific value. But they also know that we're always bringing them new ideas from adjacent industries, from other areas, and propelling them, and even at a minimum challenging their thinking as an executive team. Like, well, how are you solving this problem? So they kind of know some of the core issues that they face. But the reason they keep coming back to us is, in fact, we're sort of known as not being exactly the cheapest in our field, but the companies know that we're not only are we going to do what we said we were going to do, but along the way we're going to continue to challenge them and bring new ideas in different ways. And we believe that is one of the unique things about our company specifically, that we drive innovation into everything we do. And we've even actually just named Saideep Raj, one of my buddies, as our new Chief Innovation Officer for Accenture. So it's a brand new role we created specifically to institutionalize this. I mean, part of it sits like we've got 5 floors in the Salesforce Tower. I haven't been in for 9 months, but which is our innovation hub in San Francisco. Right, a lot of companies like to come out here and they go visit Google and they visit Apple and they visit, blah blah blah, and they want to sort of like immerse themselves in that and use that as an engine for the executive team to sort of think out of the box. And so that's one of the mechanisms that we put in place to enable all this other stuff to work really effectively. Mm-hmm. I would tell you a big part of the reason why we've continued to grow even through COVID, why we have such long-standing relationships with our clients and they're willing to pay a premium to us is really about innovation. It's having that stickiness and continuing to drive that value to them.
Tom, I'm wondering if you could speak a little more on this. I love this idea that one of your differentiators is that you really innovate. People bring you in, they say, we need better yields. And you say, do you? And I wonder, that must lead to some difficult moments because, especially leaders may know they want that, but the specific groups you're working with may say, no, we want a widget, just the widget, thank you. I don't want to reorg my whole unit around a new idea. How do you work with overcoming that resistance to actually doing real innovation that might actually really change some things?
Well, so first of all, look, you still got to pay the bills, right? And sometimes you do just need to go, do that, implement that widget. And that's a part of building the trust with the client is like, if you say no, or if you say, but what about this other thing? You got to recognize that individual still has their own personal management metrics that they've got to hit, and they might be like, look, if this doesn't happen, I don't have a career, right? So you sort of have to get that right balance. What we find is that that's still a good chunk of our work. But what we find is that you need to sort of like leapfrog the dialogue and have the confidence to step out and have discussions and like just without any other pre-context or without any other sort of reason, go have challenging discussions, do your research, know your stuff, have challenging discussions with clients to say, well, like, what are you doing about this? I think I was talking to Karen about Dr. Fauci, who like me went to a Jesuit high school, and he has this phrase about the 2 things he learned from his education there was precision of thought and economy of expression. Mm-hmm. And I love that phrase, or the 2 phrases, I suppose, and apply it to this same sort of circumstance. Like the precision of thought, you need to know your stuff. Pardon my almost French. You need to know it front and back. And in the case of being a services business like mine, you need to know your industry. You need to know what your clients' competitors are doing. You need to know their problems as well as they do. And one of the benefits we have is we see sort of across the whole company, whereas our clients usually sort of just own a part of it. And so they don't always see what we see. And so knowing your stuff and having precision of thought, like these are the distilled issues that you have to wrestle with, is kind of piece one. And economy of expression is essentially if you don't understand something well enough, you can't explain it simply enough. And if you listen to Fauci talk about what's going on, with the epidemic, like you can hear it in his language. He knows his stuff, and he can explain pretty complicated things very simply because he understands the core essence of those things. And so, I mean, there's a number of tricks I use for both of those, but I mean, the know your stuff part is like, that's what you learn in college, is how to learn. And that the biggest by far thing that I got out of going to Iowa State University was learning how to learn. And if you ever stop learning, you're done. Intellectual curiosity and the intellectual rigor of understanding kind of how to pull the pieces together is the key thing you should be focusing on if you're at Iowa State as a student right now. And never stopping that is the challenge once you're no longer in the university. And so, anyway, I'm kind of all over the map on this question.
I love this. I want to capture this moment, though, because you're essentially saying the way that you overcome resistance to innovation is to have a great idea clearly expressed. And when people have faith in their confidence and credibility.
Actually, Abram, I don't know. I didn't mean to say that. What I would alter in what you just said was, it is to understand the context really well so that you can ask the right question. Thousands of innovation initiatives have failed because they bypassed the ask the right question and went right to let's solve the right problem. Let's answer the problem the right way. And this is why Anna Liz, had that design thinking book behind her. Like, this is one of the core principles of innovation to me, is learning how to ask the right question. The bank, go back to, Australia National Bank, they would never we never would have come up with a solution if we let them get away with the question they asked us, and we'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Right? They were like, help us to improve yields in this part of our portfolio. And we didn't allow ourselves to be satisfied with that question. We went back to fundamentals. We knew their business well enough to know that the core problem was really these losses. And why are those losses happening? In consulting, we have this term called the 6 whys. Like, don't take anybody's answer to a question without asking why 6 times. In a way, design thinking is one of those means that we do that. We use to develop that, and it's a more end-to-end process. But the very front end of design thinking is about getting the human dimension of the problem articulated properly, so that you can actually solve it. And I can remember my senior design project, early I don't know what the heck it was, 483 or something, where we designed an entirely new airplane, and I wanted to design a very particular sort of configuration of airplane, and I convinced my design team to do that. And we did a great job. Like, all the engineering was great. I did the control systems. We had an analysis guy. We had an airframe person, right? We brought that heterogeneous team together. But at the end of the semester, we pulled the business plan together, and my professor, oh gosh, I forgot who it was now. It might have been Rich Hyndman, was like, why are you building this plane? And our whole team was like, right? We never asked the question. We just took the assignment and said, well, we got to go build a plane. And, there was sort of a mission statement, but we had no sort of rationale for why we went on the path we did. So I can't emphasize enough that asking the right question is actually the problem.
Tom, I think that's a really important distinction. Solving the problem rather than the trigger, right? So rather than looking at the immediate impact, which is what we tend to solve, how do we alleviate the pain point? Where it's much more complicated than that. And you talk about the 6 whys. Is there anything, like, as your observation, as an innovator, is there something that rises to the surface that helps you beeline that, besides the whys, to really look at, okay, everybody thinks this is the problem, but in fact, the way to really challenge people to look at those problems, try this. What approach do you get to actually get people to engage, to move beyond the trigger?
I mean, I'm gonna go back to design thinking. I mean, reach out to Anna. It trained in design thinking. I mean, quite. I'm very serious because not only is it sort of the front end of this, but it's also a mechanism for you to sort of cycle through and test and go back to foundational principles. I'm not sure if you've got a course on Anna. I just recommend all of you to understand it because it is all about. I mean, empathy is a key piece of this. Kind of the human dimension of the questions that you ask is one of the places where you usually get it wrong. And when people are resistant, understanding where they're coming from and why they're resistant often leads you to the path of the right question.
Wow, that's great.
Because sometimes the reason they're resistant is because they're like, no, my measures, I'm measuring in what I do over this way. And so sometimes when you start poking, you realize part of the problem is actually the measures, not the problem that you solved was so framed in the measures that were wrong that you can't actually find the right problem. And so these are threads that allow you to really kind of work through that this one. So I mean, I can't endorse it any stronger than that. In fact, within Accenture, we've kind of absconded design thinking overall, and we call it form, but it's the same sort of 5 steps process, and the process of exploration is on the front end. I'd say the other thing we do is even today in the virtual realm, forcibly pull people out of their environment. It's astonishing how powerful it is to get people, it's not just like laptop down, phone on mute. It's like get them out of their physical environment. And if you can't do that, at least get them into an environment where, like, we create a virtual environment now. In fact, I got our Oculus Rifts that we're using for our clients, where we'll actually get them into a virtual space, and it's pretty compelling. I got to admit, if you haven't used it, to just jar their mental frame, to stop them thinking about my deadline and my metrics and my boss and my whatever it might be. That's all of that is the lubricant on the front end of that process to get people to think the right way.
Anna Lush.
So many things I'm writing. I'm sorry, Tom. I'm always writing so many notes, and then I don't want to be rude and not be looking at you, but I'm writing so many things. So one of the things, yes, design thinking. I am from the old school of thought, not the design thinking for production and product, but the old one, which was reframing the question. So I really appreciate that you're putting that forward. I cannot stress enough in everything that we do regarding innovation to really rip the brief. It's one of the things that we do in all our classes, in all our consultancy, is rip the brief apart, which clients don't like. They're really upset with us, but we want to ask, what is the right question? So reframing, and we don't call it problem solving anymore. We call it problem loving, because we love the part of the problem more than the solution. So I really appreciate that you're bringing that forward. And
for the record, I had no idea you were going to have that on your wall today when we got on this call.
Yeah, should I? I'm so sorry. I'm very conscious that it's my home, but it's all the books that we have. But again, I am a little bit old school. It's not just the design for the sake of the solution and the end product, but it's really the intention. And you mentioned mission statement and added value. And Abraham also asked about cultures of exploration and cultures of exploitation. And if we go back and actually start thinking more about the problems that we have and reframe how the social impact of those problems have in the world, I think then the world will be full of innovators. It's not just the inventors, but innovators as a mindset. And that's one of the things I think the discussion is neatly going there, because one of the things I'm looking at you dancing as well in the stage, and I'm seeing you hearing your stories and thinking that it's the mindset. You were almost triggered since you were a child, being the 7th, scrapping the leftovers. You were triggered.
I had to think on my feet. I actually don't have a chair.
Exactly.
I have a standing desk, and so
I'm wondering what can we offer to our students and for whoever who's watching this after. So in our recordings, what can we tell them about, like, how do you get this innovation mindset? Because I can see the tools that you used, improv, design thinking, but what is it innate that actually is there? What makes you jump?
Maybe let me go through, I have a perspective that there's sort of 5 key things that you got to get right as a person to be an innovator. The first of them we've sort of touched on a little bit is diversity, actually. And honestly, I mean, I mentioned earlier that culture becomes a problem for most of my clients as companies, but I think it's a part of them. It's one of the dimensions of the mindset that innovators have to get their brains around. It's the center of everything, right? You can't innovate with 5 people exactly like you. Like, there's no diversity of thought or opinion to challenge thinking. It's just like the 5 people are going to see the one problem statement and say, yep, that sounds great. 5 engineers are like, yeah, let's go design that airplane. We didn't have anybody challenging our thinking, and the ability to have the humility and intellectual curiosity to bring in people with different races, sexes, religions, geographic homes, social norms, ages, educations. Like, that's what creates the tapestry that enables innovation to flourish, because otherwise everything gets trampled down if it's a little bit off of the sort of the worldview of a group of people. I can't emphasize that enough. If you in business, my old job, it was about the ecosystem, right? I had direct competitors who we would work together on different things, and like, the understanding how they had a different perspective about the marketplace was super instructive to me. And so, the inspiration for innovation comes from adversity, tough people having tough background experiences in their lives, and that compels and propels them in ways that, when you pull the context together, it's a lot of work to kind of keep, herding bats, which is a 3-dimensional version of cats. But that diversity is a key ingredient. And on this one, my challenge to you is think about who you interact with on a daily basis, and open your mind. And in your social circles, again, hard to do right now, but like, just even if you're in class, at work, whatever, like, think about the people you're interacting with. And my guess is you probably spend a lot of time with people a lot like you, which is totally understandable and acceptable. Add to that people who don't think a lot like you necessarily, and use that as a test for yourself, and kind of expand your own brain. I mentioned design thinking, so the second big area is asking the right questions. I think we probably expounded on that enough. My recommendation there is go reach out to Anna. And do you have a design thinking class?
Yes, we do. Okay. And we have one new now on disruptive innovation, and we're looking at how can you innovate from within. We just had that conversation as well. And I find that very important. So I'm really fascinated by what you are sharing, because you're sharing yourself. You're not sharing so much what you do at Accenture. You are, but you're also, like, your presence and sharing what you do from within. And I find that's one of the triggers. One of the things I find for students in general is that the best way to put this in practice is not in the classroom, unless you look at the classroom. I would like to have you over in my classroom, so that the classrooms are populated with stories, and not just the books, that are populated with people and conversations, and not just a visit and then you leave, but actually a visit, and then we talk more and we connect more. And I find that having courses about the topic need to be more about you, Tom. Tell me about you, Tom, so that then our students can move forward. Someone, I forgot, Karen, please tell me that it's not about the hard skills, but it's the soft skills.
Yeah.
Behavior. I call it behavioral capacity, not technical competency. It's how we build our how we architect our behaviors and human experiences.
And I think we are I know from fact that you said that you started in architecture. I know it's easier. I really wake up loving what I'm doing, because I'm teaching the subject that is my person. So it's empathy and diversity of thought. So I'm very lucky on that one. But having this part that we are discussing now, like, how can we help students and everyone who get in contact with, clients, teachers, colleagues, actually come from that place of behavioral capacity. They have the capacity too. And so, yeah.
Actually have a question. That's a good segue. So we have a question.
Do you mind if I
yeah.
Let me just sort of walk these other areas, and just that'll maybe act as a platform we can go in different directions. So I talked about kind of a rumble and in improv, right? So like my suggestion there is, if you're into software development, go look at Agile methodology. If you're if you're not, like go at least see improv. I talked about being able to communicate. The sort of Dr. Fauci and precision of thought, economy of expression. There's something called the pyramid principle, which I train like almost everybody that works for me on this thing called the pyramid principle. It's a really old concept, but it's a structured way to pull a massive amount of thoughts together into a inductive reasoning set of arguments for why something should be done. I would highly recommend it's a little bit dry reading. If you find somebody that kind of knows about how to use it, it's a great set of tools. But I want to point out that we haven't really talked about is growth mindset.
Yeah.
And
ding, ding,
I would
ring my bell. Ding ding ding. Where's my bell?
Well, am I okay? But like, look, so the case study here is if I were to ask any of you, if I gave you an option of, I will give you in 1 month from today, I'll give you $1 million, or starting today, I will give you a penny and I'll double it every day for that same month. Which would you take? Most people would just take the $1 million, right? But you'll actually get 10 times as much money if you take a penny today and double it every day. Like the human brain is built through history to think linearly. We're really good at extrapolating in a straight line. I actually had a bet in a bar one time that more than 50% of the people in the bar would understand what extrapolation means, and I lost massively. But if you take the data points you have today and extend them out into the future, if it goes along a straight line, people intuitively are really accurate on where they think the landing point is going to be. Nonlinear problems, especially exponential growth problems like a pandemic, people do not intuitively understand the dynamics of those kinds of systems. We call it 10x thinking. It's all about, like, there are decisions you would never take if you thought stuff was going to move linearly. And so if you don't challenge your own thinking about a growth mindset to say, you know what? I mean, in the business that I'm driving with Google right now, we are growing at about 100% a year for the past several years. Like, you don't have to do that for very long. So if we do this for 30 years, I'm going to be a 100 billionaire, right? You don't have to do it for long for it to pile up really rapidly. And so the decisions you think are really far away, like, do I start wearing a mask because I don't know anybody that has COVID, like, that can pivot really rapidly. And understanding that dynamic is also really important to driving innovation, because the things that really change the world are 10x things. They're growth mindset things. And so I think that a couple suggestions on this one are there is an organization called Singularity University, who has like some amazing speakers. They got TED Talks, but like, kind of look them up. And what Singularity University is all about is taking the power of like kind of the venture community out here in Silicon Valley, for example, and aiming it towards really untractable problems of the world, and apply this notion of 10x thinking, of a growth mindset. It's all about intellectual curiosity. It's all about thinking big and saying, why not, right? And not like pushing stuff out of the way just because it seems really hard. Because if it ends up that you can put a nonlinear mechanism in place to go attack that problem, you get to the answer a lot faster than you think you're gonna.
Yeah.
And I think that's.
So I know I interrupted a question there, but
no, it's okay, because it's a fantastic segue. It all worked out. So we actually have a question from Tori, and Tori wants to know more about the mindset of a student as it relates to academics, especially when it comes to failure. I know that we've talked a lot about like the growth mindset and the mindset of an entrepreneur and innovator, but what advice or what kind of mindset would you recommend for someone who is pursuing a degree right now? What are things that they should be thinking about? What are things that should be driving them? Because we talked a lot about soft skills and hard skills and technical skills. And at the end of the day, you know, people do need to have a certain grade in order to get a degree. So how do we kind of balance that?
It's a great question. I mean, let me go back to a comment I think I made earlier, which is that the most important thing I learned at Iowa State was how to learn and to gut out the hard stuff. As I mentioned, I'm an intuitive, and there's a couple concepts that I struggled with in college. Usually, I got to admit, usually I didn't have to work that hard in the hard classes because I could sort of intuitively understand it, and so I could sort of go back to the math and sort of, I don't want to say fake it, but like I understood the broad concepts well enough. But like I would get massively frustrated at some of the harder stuff. And the thing I learned from going through the program at Iowa State was that I could, you know, if I pushed hard enough, I could get through it. I could kind of have confidence in answering the hard problems. And so I guess what I would say is, yes, you've got to go through your coursework, get the foundational principles, because your starting point in your life, if you're a student, is going to be the sort of the brand that you create out of the degree that you get. And that's how you're going to launch into what you do. Now, I didn't do my degree for very long. My first job at Anderson Consulting when I joined was I did actually wing design for IndyCar race cars. It was actually Mario Andretti and Nigel Mansell. And then I did data telemetry for the race cars as well. Like, so it's sort of, I used it for like 6 months and then immediately took a sharp turn and got into data and acquisition and telemetry. But like, my point is the classwork is all about learning, teaching yourself how to learn and how to be intellectually curious. So that's like, do just enough of that to get a grade, to sort of, but be thinking of it in terms of, I'm learning how to learn. And what you learn is going to be important, don't get me wrong, but learning that you have the confidence to learn is by far more important than the specifics of what you did learn.
Tom, I think I want to capitalize to stop, because that's a really important point. One of the things an innovator does is they don't focus on execution. They make explicit how execution is important, but to your point, making explicit how they got to where they got. They capture their IP, right, about process and how they go. So I just want to capture your point on that. When they're in a classroom, even if they're frustrated by the hard work and they're getting their grade, part of their job is to figure out what's behind the learning, right? How I learn, how I think.
Absolutely. The meta questions, so to speak.
Meta questions.
So Tori, I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I mean, I think my point is, don't do too much. I don't want to say this the wrong way, but like, it's not just about the grades. It's not just about getting everything perfect. Like having a good GPA. I mean, look, I had like a low 3s GPA in undergrad. I'm not proud of it. And part of the reason I went back to grad school is to get an A, actually. But but I will tell you, I'm glad I did it that way. I mean, it was good enough to get jobs, but it wasn't my calling card. And you know, I wasn't smart enough then to realize sort of how that would play out. I have the fortune of 30 years behind me since then to sort of put it in context. But the thing I did was I gutted out the hard stuff and learned from that, and recognized that there's no problem I can't find some way to go solve.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tom. And actually, you're doing a great job. You're leading me from one question to another. So I have another one for you. And this is from Sean. And Sean wants to know how they can talk about innovation on their resume. So I'd like to ask you a question. How do you talk about innovation on your resume? And then what advice would you give to students that are coming right out of college, whether they're coming as a graduate student, an undergraduate student? Should they focus more on the problem that they solve? Should they focus more on collaboration? Should they focus on mindset? How do you articulate and capture all of that into a maybe 1, possibly 2-page resume, if even that? How do you do it?
So, I mean, I think the easy things are things that you should pursue that you can put on a resume. It's team projects, design work, like things that force you to apply what you know in a way that is very unpredictable. So kind of getting grades is interesting. You know, one of my biggest sort of regrets at Iowa State, especially being in the aerospace program, was I never did the sun rays team, right? So this is like back when solar panels were massively inefficient. It's a race to sort of get a solar powered car to go as far as possible. You know, and back in the 80s, that wasn't really far. But like the people that I know that did that, I always had I got to see like the result of how it changed them. And so that's one of the things that I always look for is, like I said, it's not just like extracurriculars, but how did you go work with another team to go solve a really hard problem? That's a massive thing that I look for on a resume itself. I think also some of it is the language that you use in describing your experiences. I mean, I got to admit, I did the first job I got as an intern was with an engineering company in Chicago, and I had been struggling to get jobs. And I was a little bit arrogant maybe in college, and and so my resume was like very chest beating. And my dad, God bless him, my dad is an advertising executive. I think Don Draper actually, and he pulled me aside one time. He's like, "Son, let me suggest a little bit of a change in your cover letter." And I made this one change, and I was amazed at how many more phone calls I got. And what I said in that was like, at the very end of my cover letter, I said, despite all of these qualifications, I recognize that I am 20 years old and I'm perfectly happy to run blueprints and make coffee. And I couldn't believe, like, I went from like 10% response to like 80% response. It was the funniest thing. So like the tone you take, the humility you demonstrate in how you write what you write, and the fact that you realize you don't know everything, that you realize that even your background is like directed in one place and you have other places you draw inspiration from, like that's another less overt way that I look for, that language that people recognize, humility, I'm doing great in school and there's so much more I want to learn, and etc. Like that's another really important piece for me. And I do sort of the homogeneity of kind of your experience is something to be cognizant of. I was Pandora, if for those of you that use it, I don't know if that's like an old person thing now, but it started as the music genome project, and it was a bunch of people that kind of laid out the characteristics of different sorts of music. I like Pandora a lot, but if those of you that use it a lot, like I have it set to every morning on my Sonos in my room to just play this one Pandora station, and I found like after like 2 weeks, I'm like, God, this song again? Like you every once in a while in your life, you have to hit the add variety button to your life and the people that you interact with and the things that you're doing. Otherwise, like it becomes obvious in your resume and when you talk with people, like, all right, like you're really good in this one space, but you're not even thinking about the rest of the world. So that would be, think about Pandora perhaps as well, in both what you're writing, but I mean just literally in how you're living your life.
That's an awesome response. And I love how you talked about, humility, because I'm a millennial and I really feel like we get a bad rep. Like people are like, oh, you millennials think you know everything. And then Gen Z, they have the same rep too. But I think it's important for my generation and then Gen Z as well to be reminded that it's so important to know your stuff, but also be humble, be open to mentorship, be open to, starting and building and getting to where you need to get to, but maybe just start at the very basic level because we feel like we got it. We're ready to just jump into everything. So I really loved your point about that. I have one more question that I'll try to squeeze in. Do you think that you sparked innovation in any of your classmates when you were in school? That question is from Anthony. And then maybe you could touch on, maybe if you feel like you didn't, how or what advice would you give to students to kind of drive that change and be a spark of innovation while they're in undergrad or in a graduate program at Iowa State?
Good question.
I know I tried. I'm not sure I can answer whether I actually did. But I recall one or two design classes where I became the sort of annoying guy that kept going, hey, like, what is this really the right path, the right path, the right question? I do recall specifically one of my design classes, I'm trying to remember the exact problem, but it's sort of like the airplane design problem where we sort of just went off and running. And like, if you don't ask that question early, it just annoys the crap out of people because they're like, well, look, we're already going down this path, right? And so part of it is timing. And I think maybe in those cases, I got people sort of challenging their core thinking, but they're all like, well, I mean, we already invested, 3 weeks of the course in this problem. Like, we got to just keep going. And so I think I got enough people doubting whether we were really thinking about it the right way, but I probably did it too late. And so timing is important here, right? And this, in a lot of ways, you may know the feeling when you like hand it in an exam and right as it hits the desk or right as you hit the submit button, you're like, oh, I did like that one problem, I did it wrong. Like, it's that same feeling, or like the first time you drove your dad's car into a snowbank or something. Like, there's that feeling of after you've lit the fuses and all the engines are running. Sorry, that's a rocket science thing, but like once that's happening, you're kind of locked and loaded and everyone feels like you cannot stop. And that's not really true, but like the sooner you stop it, the less you invest in the wrong outcome. And so like having that confidence and being pretty assertive about it, and empathetic to the investment that's already been made it's all about this balance. And so, I mean, I know I tried. I think that if you're going to be thinking about in a class context or in a project context, being innovative, you got to think about it early. You got to be like, be the annoying person in the first 2 weeks that asks the really hard questions, and then then kind of back off. Because then it's just too late to, you can innovate at a micro level, but then you're just adjusting. Then it's more like Six Sigma than it is like reinventing things.
Well, thank you, Tom. We're nearly at time. I know. I think all of our panelists would love to talk with you all day long if we could, but we are scheduled for an hour and a half. This has been an amazing session, I have to say. I think everyone feels that way. The Q&A has been amazing. I'd like to thank you, and I'd like to turn it over to Karen, who can send us out on a few reminders as we wrap up our time.
Fabulous. Well, I also think it's not just an end, Tom, right? Because we started on the note of stewardship, and in fact, one of the compelling qualities of an innovator is the eternal return, right? To go back to where you began your innovative journey and continue it and engage as a way to refresh and renew and rebuild that next generation. And so you have been so generous about that, Tom, about returning. And so we can expect to see much more of you, I think, just by your generous nature and your commitment to Iowa State and where you started your work. So my hope is that this is
hopefully in person at some point.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We're counting on it. So I will remind our viewers, or our listeners, I guess, don't forget to check out our Student Innovation website. We have some really cool things going on. The next one is on October 3rd, Lewis Carr is inviting yourself into big conversations. How do you do that, especially as a young person? And, you know, what is your role? How can you influence change and be a change maker? So he'll be speaking on October 23rd. Check our Innovation Center website out for that. On October 16th, you can't miss next Friday. For one thing, we're going to announce the winner of our first Dash competition. And for another thing, we have Elena Money Garman speaking. She is the CEO of Fresh Paint and Garman Homes in Apex in North Carolina. She is, they call her Elena Money, AKA Build Like a Girl. She's a home builder, a writer, and a speaker. She's the founder and CEO of Garman Homes and Fresh Paint. And one of the things about Elena as an innovator is she has become a huge advocate for women in the building industry. And in fact was named the Professional Builders Magazine's list of 40 under 40. And so again, that kind of pioneer, groundbreaker, pushing the envelope, defining the problems, and stewarding, being a steward of the next generation. So please look for us with that. And remember, we're innovation for students, with students, and by students. And we really look forward to working with you, Tom, in the future. Thank you again. Thank Abram, Spencer, Nakaya, and Analuj. And here we go till next week. See you next week.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you. Fabulous, Tom.
Thanks.
Bye.
Cheers.
Everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.